I gotta follow Joe. Cognitive dissonance is real. And actually that's a really good segue. So I'm gonna start by reintroducing myself because Mike, I'm sorry. Eklanete, Dene Eriel Tchekwie Deranger My name is Eriel Tchekwie Deranger, and I'm a member of the Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation, and I belong to the Dene or the Dene people. And we're located in Northern Alberta, and I just want to acknowledge the traditional territory of Treaty 6 and the Amiskwachis. Again, I don't speak Cree, so I tried really hard. But I'd like to start with this map. Does anyone know what this map is trying to show us? Anyone? Indigenous Peoples territory. And I like to start because my presentation is going to be a lot on Indigenous peoples. Now, Indigenous people represent about 5% of the global population, or about 370 million people worldwide. And about 5,000 distinct groups, Dene being one of those people, in over 90 different countries in the world. So we're recognized everywhere. But the interesting stuff is that 22% of the world's land surface is occupied or recognized Indigenous territories. That's compared to about only 3 to maybe 4% of the land surface being urban centers. So we actually occupy a lot of the land surface. What's really interesting is that of that land surface, it represents 80% of the world's global biodiversity. I said world's global, that's redundant. And what's really interesting is 85% of the world's protected and conservation zones is also within or adjacent to Indigenous territories. I know this and live this firsthand. My nation, the Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation, is on the edge of the UNESCO World Heritage Site. The Mikisew Cree, our neighbors, advocated for the protection and issuing that the Wood Buffalo National Park was under threat from downstream development. We are advocating and protecting the world's biodiversity, which has become critical and necessary in order for us to achieve real climate stabilization. Now, the rights of Indigenous peoples are intrinsically connected to the land. In order for our rights, which are enshrined in the Canadian Constitution, to hunting, fishing, and trapping rights, and within the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, it's intrinsically connected to having healthy biodiversities, ecosystems, in order for us to practice that. Because as Indigenous peoples, who we are is intrinsically connected to the land. This is all going to come back to climate change in a minute, and it might seem abstract, but it's really, really critical. So we're in the global climate crisis. Joe stole a lot of my thunder on some of the stuff that I was going to talk about. You know, the world leaders have come together, and we created the Paris Agreement. It is the first international convention to recognize the rights of Indigenous people since the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People in 2007. And that becomes a really critical component because we're trying to keep global temperatures 2 degrees below pre-industrial, 2 degrees below? Yes, I don't know what it is. 2 degrees above, I can't remember, I've lost my speaking point. But Indigenous communities are feeling the impacts of climate change first and foremost, and that's because our lives, lifestyles, cultures, and identities are intrinsically connected to the land. This is from the Arctic. Communities are literally, with the permafrost melting, are slipping into the oceans. This is flooding in rural communities in Alberta. This was the flood, can't remember the community right now. This was the Fort McMurray forest fires. This is in the community of Fort Chipewyan, where I'm from, where we're seeing our glacial-fed river system and Lake Athabasca and the Athabasca River, declining every single year because of increases to temperatures, which is melting the glacier faster, which the systems aren't able to handle it, and it's actually leading to droughts in the northern downstream communities. So climate change, as Joe talked about, isn't just about like one central thing, it's everything. This is where we have to come back and circle back to Indigenous peoples' rights. The former president of the United Nations General Assembly stated that Indigenous peoples are vital to many ecosystems in their lands and territories and help enhance the resiliency of these ecosystems. In addition, Indigenous peoples interpret and react to the impacts of climate change in creative ways, drawing on traditional knowledge and other technologies to find solutions that society at large can replicate. and to counter pending changes. This is why the rights of Indigenous peoples were included within the Paris Agreement. This is why it becomes critical for us to work with Indigenous communities to utilize that knowledge, to find those systems. You know, I love Dustin's presentation on food systems because permaculture was an active thing before colonization. There was a really fantastic book by a woman named Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz called The Indigenous History of the United States, which has a whole chapter talking about the landscapes and the permaculture that was used in North America before it was fundamentally changed by colonial ideologies and systems of white supremacy that suppressed Indigenous ways of living in harmony with the ecosystems. But the problem is we can't get past rhetoric. We say things like Indigenous people are change agents, yet we still are relegated to the sidelines. This is two pictures from climate negotiations. The bottom one was Copenhagen 2009, and the top one was Paris 2015. In order for Indigenous peoples to have voices in the climate movement, we often have to take to the streets just to have our voices heard. And while we are recognized within the Paris Agreement, we still don't have a seat within the decision-making models that are being created to find solutions. So we find ourselves in the streets. We find our communities are the ones that are not just talking about building solutions, but challenging the drivers of climate change. This is a woman who's been fighting drilling in the Arctic Sea. We have communities stepping out in the tar sands calling for an end to the destruction and a starting to the healing. People fighting pipelines that are taking Alberta's oil to market. People stopping the fracking in eastern Canada. And then one of the most notable things was the Dakota Access Fight Line in South Dakota. And what we're asking for is not just combating climate change, but talking about climate justice and effectively looking at the drivers of climate change and those that have been marginalized, those that are most impacted, having a seat at the table to build solutions that we can all benefit from. Because if we're serious about addressing the climate crisis, it's not just about building renewable energy. It's not just about building bike lanes, which we need, fundamentally we need, but we also have to be talking about the root causes that got us here. And I just want to end on this last point. We need to start talking about ways we can decolonize the environment. And someone asked me once, what does decolonization mean? And this is the most simple explanation. It's about the return of and connections to land. And that is for everybody. Decolonization starts with us individually, coming back to that reconnection of who we are as humanity. We are a fundamental part of ecosystems, and we need to reclaim that, not just as Indigenous people, but as humanity. So thank you very much. Decolonization, NCFU only.